full copy that we have of the official report, 15 pages that have been released on what actually led to the crash of this Air India flight that was flying from Ahmedabad to Gatwick last month. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that the report, after having gone through a preliminary analysis, is inconclusive. I'm going to go through every bit of these 15 pages that have been isolated into what has actually happened and what the investigators say have actually happened. But what we need to examine is what was the cause of the accident. The cause of the accident was the fuel switches to both engines going into cut-off mode. Why did the fuel switches go into cut-off mode? That's the bottom line part, which remains inconclusive. So now we know the cause of the accident. It preliminary was not a bird strike. The aircraft was not overweight. It had a clearance to fly. Everything was fine with the aircraft at the get-go. At least the understanding seems to be that for the inspections that were done, the maintenance history, the report says, was not pointing to something untoward. So the bottom line then becomes, what was wrong with the aircraft? We don't as yet know. But the cause of the accident, as per the report, was that the fuel switches went into cut-off mode. They went back into the on mode during these few seconds that it took from the airport to the crash site, but it was too late. One of the engines managed to relight. The second engine could not relight. It could not gain sufficient thrust. So the bottom line is that the fuel switches of the Air India flight from Ahmedabad to Gatwick switched off. Now, the report says that the voice data recorder has captured what happened. The pilot asks the co-pilot, "Did you switch off the fuel switches?" And the co-pilot responds, "No, I did not." So for some reason, both the fuel switches to both engines simultaneously within seconds of each other switched off. And the pilot asked the co-pilot, as per the flight data recorder, "Did you switch off the fuel switches?" And the co-pilot responds, "No." Then within a few seconds of each other, the fuel switches flip back on and the engines go into an automatic relighting mode. They do. One engine does relight but does not gain sufficient thrust, and the other engine is unable to relight, therefore it's unable to bring in fuel into the engine. So the cause of the crash was the fuel switches going into cut-off mode, therefore switching off fuel to both engines nearly simultaneously. That was the cause of the crash. Now, what the report does not conclude is why did the fuel switches simultaneously switch off? Was it a software glitch? Was it a mechanical glitch? Or did the pilot or co-pilot mistakenly switch off both the fuel switches? Now, if you ask a reputed pilot from anywhere, both experienced pilots flying, would in the middle of takeoff a pilot or co-pilot switch off both the fuel switches simultaneously by mistake or by intent? Very unlikely. Let's have a look at what the report says. The introduction. This is the Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, okay, of the Boeing Model 717-200 airplanes, okay, of the potential for disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Based on an assessment utilizing the limited currently available data at this time, the airworthiness concern is not an unsafe condition, and it points out all the model numbers which had this potential for disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature, which is the 747-400, 400D, 400F, the 8F series, 757-200, 200CB, 200PF, 300 series, 761-200, 300, 300F, 400ER, and the 2 series airplanes, including the model 787, 8, 9, and 10, model MD-11 and MD-11F airplanes, and model MD-90-30 airplanes. So Boeing had a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, an SAIB, which was advising registered owners and operators of these aircraft that there was a known glitch, a known anomaly, which had the potential, it had never happened before, but had the potential for disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. And this went across the 737, the 717, the 747, and the 757, and the 786, and the 787, and the 767. So pretty much every Boeing aircraft that was manufactured or has been going on, it had this potential for disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. But on the basis of the data that has been organized, this did not qualify for them as an airworthiness concern or an unsafe condition that would warrant an airworthiness directive, is what the report says. Now, the report says that the US FAA is now going to be examining this further on whether this makes sense or not make sense given what happened in this aircraft. But let's have a look. The first page of the report looks at the background. Okay. It says the Boeing company received reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The fuel control switches are installed on the control stand in the flight deck and used by the pilot to supply or cut off fuel to the engines. The fuel control switch has a locking feature to prevent inadvertent operation that could result in unintended switch movement between the fuel supply and fuel cutoff positions. In order to move the switch from one position to the other, under the condition where the locking feature is engaged, it is necessary for the pilot to lift the switch up while transitioning the switch position. If the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition, and the switch would be exposed to the potential of inadvertent operation. Inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in-flight engine shutdown. Boeing informed the FAA that the fuel control switch designs, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, and the table identifies which all models it indicates, and the fuel control switch is manufactured by the company known as Honeywell. Now, the same fuel control switch is used in the 717, 737, 747, 757, 767, 787, MD-11 and MD-90 aircraft. Now, the FAA has issued recommendations that all owners and operators of these affected airplanes incorporate the following actions at the earliest opportunity. Number one, inspect the locking feature of the fuel control switch to ensure its engagement while the airplane is on the ground. Check whether the fuel control switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting up the switch. And if the switch can be moved without lifting it up, the locking feature has been disengaged and the switch should be replaced at the earliest opportunity. Now, for Boeing models 737, 700, 700C, 800 and 900 ER series airplanes and Boeing models 737, 8 and 9 airplanes delivered with a fuel control switch having a particular series number, that this fuel control switch should be replaced with a switch having a different series number, which includes an improved locking feature. Now, this was the known issue. The FAA recommendation further read, and I'm quoting, "We request the owners and operators to report any failure of the locking feature of the fuel control switch to Boeing. The report should include the date the failure occurred, the fuel control switch PN number, airplane model, airplane serial number, and airplane registration number. Under the provisions of the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Office of Budget Management, they've approved the information collection contained in this particular Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, and they've assigned it a control number which was 21200731. So Boeing issues a special airworthiness information bulletin to all operators of its aircraft across all models, 737, 747, 757, that we have a known fuel control switch which is manufactured by Honeywell. This fuel control switch can be toggled on and off. There is a special feature for you to be able to lock the fuel control switch. But because of an issue of this feature in certain registration numbers of this manufactured fuel control switch, this means that the locking feature is not permanently on, which means that instead of a special way, which means you have to lift the switch and lift it up and lift it down, versus just switch it up and switch it down, because of this, there is a potential for an unintended switch off while the aircraft is flying. This was not considered an issue with denying an airworthiness certificate to these existing aircraft. It was an advisory was issued by the FAA to all operator airlines that listen, check this fuel control switch. If its default position is unlocked, replace it. And if you're having a problem, report it to us. But it was not considered as a serious enough threat for it to ground the aircraft. Now, this is the premise with which the FAA began its entire conversation on what is going on. Then comes the entire report which has been put out of the investigation that has happened into the Air India aircraft. Now, this 15-page report, which goes into extensive details, is now telling us what exactly took place. Now, they examine the background, they examine the details, and the bottom line conclusion is, and which is where I began this conversation, is that the report is concluding that the cause of the crash was because both the fuel supply switches were in cutoff mode. Now, let's examine the background of this. And let me just read out the report so you have it in full. On 12th June 2025, AAIB was notified of an accident involving Air India's B787 aircraft bearing registration number VT-ANB at Ahmedabad. As per the notification, the aircraft was operating flight AI-171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick and crashed at about 0809 UTC immediately after takeoff. The notification was received from the Airports Authority of India and the airline operator. On receipt of the information, a team of 5 officers from the AAIB, including DG AAIB, reached Ahmedabad on the same day. Another 3 officers from the DGCA's Air Safety Directorate arrived from Mumbai to assist in the accident site activities and were put at the disposal of the DG AAIB. The efforts at the site were led by the DG AAIB and evidence collection and other site activities were carried out. The initial notification of this accident as per ICAO Annex 13 was sent to the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, USA, which represented the state of design and manufacture. As per the information notified to the AAIB, the fatalities amongst passengers also included citizens from the UK, Portugal, and Canada. The initial notification of the accident as per the ICAO Annex 13 was also sent to the AAIB UK, GPIAAF Portugal, and the Transportation Safety Board TSB Canada, which represented the other states whose citizens suffered fatalities in the incident. The NTSB USA appointed an accredited representative and technical advisor from Boeing, GE, and the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, to assist in the investigation. A team led by the NTSB accredited representative, comprising of representatives from Boeing, GE, and FAA, arrived at Ahmedabad on the 15th of June 2025. A team of officials from the AAIB UK also arrived in Ahmedabad and visited the site with DG AAIB. The DG AAIB, in exercise of powers conferred to him by Rule 11.1 of the Aircraft Investigation of Accidents and Incidents Rules 2017, appointed an investigation team comprising Mr. Sanjay Kumar Singh, investigator in charge, Mr. Jasbir Singh Larga as chief investigator, and Mr. Vipin Varakot, Mr. Veeraraghavan K, and Mr. Vaishnav Vijayakumar as investigators. Experienced pilots, engineers, aviation medicine specialists, aviation psychologists, and flight recorder specialists have been taken on board as subject matter experts to assist in the investigation of the area. There were 12 crew fatalities, 227 passenger fatalities, and 19 other fatalities. The aircraft model was Boeing 787-8, serial number 36279, year of manufacture 2013, name of owner Air India Limited, certificate of registration 4475/4, certificate of airworthiness 6584, valid subject to the validity of the airworthiness review certificate. Latest ARC, which is the airworthiness certificate, was issued on the 22nd of May 2025, so less than a month before the crash took place. It was valid till the 23rd of May 2026. The aircraft had flown 41,868 total hours. The engine type was the GENX 1B70/75/P2. Date of manufacture of the engine was 20th May 2012. The engine serial number was 956174. Total engine hours and cycles were 27,791 engine hours and 4,298 cycles. The engine type, right hand, was GENX1B70P2 as well. Date of manufacture of the right engine was 21st January 2013, bearing the serial number 956235. This had 33,439 total engine hours. The last major line maintenance check as per the aircraft maintenance program was L11 and L12. The check was carried out at 38,500 engine hours at 7,255 cycles, and the next major check was due in December 2025. The left-hand engine was installed on the 1st of May 2025, and the right-hand engine was installed on the aircraft on 26th March 2025. So the engines both had been recently installed on the aircraft in the preceding 2 months of the crash. There were 4 Cat C minimum equipment list items active on the aircraft as of the 12th of June 2025. These MELs were invoked on the 9th of June 2025, and the validity of these MELs was till the 19th of June 2025. These MELs were for flight deck door visual surveillance, airport map function, core network, and an FD printer. There was a Cat MEL active with respect to nitrogen generation performance, which was valid till 20th June 2025. These were category D MELs on the aircraft related to the cabin and cargo. The validity of these MELs was also within the due date. All applicable airworthiness directives and alert service bulletins were compiled on the aircraft and engines as well. Now, then it goes on to the damage of what took place and the wreckage and impact, which is what page 3, 4, 5 are looking after. This we all know because you've seen it. Wreckage and impact. After takeoff, the aircraft impacted the BJ Medical College Hostel, which is 0.9 nautical miles from the departure end of runway 23. The emergency locator transmitter was not activated during this event. The wreckage from the first impact point till the last identified aircraft item was distributed in an area of approximately 1,000 by 400 square feet. And they put a photograph of the crash site for ready reference. Now, they say that the aircraft was losing altitude. It initially made contact with a series of trees and an incineration chimney inside the Army Medical Corps compound before impacting the northeast wall of the building. The distance between the tree on which the aircraft made its initial contact and the point on the building where the aircraft impacted is 293 feet. So from the point it hit the first tree to the point where the rest of the fuselage crashed, 300 feet. As the aircraft moved forward, it continued fragmenting and collided with other structures and vegetation. The impact witness marks on the building and airplane indicate a likely nose-up attitude of about 8 degrees, and the wings were level. The vertical stabilizer separated from the aft fuselage and came to rest about 200 feet south of the initial point of contact with the building A. The tail section and the right-hand main landing gear of the aircraft were found embedded in the northeast wall of a building where the rest of the aircraft continued its forward movement. As the airplane continued its path across the roof of building A, the right engine struck the concrete water tank structure separated from the airplane and rested underneath the water tank. The inboard parts of the right wing were found in different buildings. The right wing midsection and the outboard section was 280 feet and 520 feet found to the southwest. Then it goes on to define where the landing gear was found, where the nose landing gear was found. The left engine separated from the airplane and struck the north corner of the fourth building, building D, at a heading of approximately 326 degrees. After the tail section was brought down, the APU was inspected and found intact inside the APU compartment. The APU air inlet door was found open. This fuselage fragmentation had sustained thermal damage as it traveled from the northwest faces from building C, D, E, and F. The thrust lever, which is the thrust lever off from the cockpit, sustained significant thermal damage. Both thrust leaders were found near the aft idle position. However, the data revealed that the thrust levers remained forward takeoff thrust until the point of impact. So they've seen and photographed the thrust levers. The thrust levers are down in an idle position. But the flight data recorder says that no, at the point of impact, the thrust levers were in full takeoff position. The reverse levers were bent but were in the stored position. The wiring from the switches and auto throttle disconnect switches were visible, but it was heavily damaged. So now, the flight recorders. The aft AFIR, which was recovered, was badly damaged. The forward EAFR, which is the flight recorder, was located on the 16th of June from the wreckage debris. It was still attached to the equipment shelf while part of the connector melted but still connected. The ULB was still connected to the housing and the lithium battery was also attached to the equipment shelf, which was later removed prior to transportation. Both EAFRs, which are the flight data recorders, were transported from Ahmedabad to the AAIB's facility at New Delhi on the 24th of June. Like various other cases where the data was damaged, flight recorders were downloaded by the AAIB after sourcing a golden chassis and relevant download cables from the DGCA and other accident investigation authorities. In this case, the golden chassis and download cables required to download the data were sourced from the NTSB in the USA. The items arrived on the 23rd of June 2025. The download from the forward flight data recorder was attempted on the 24th of June. The CPM was received and found to be in good condition. The CPM was mounted on the golden chassis and the raw data was downloaded. The downloaded flight data contained approximately 49 hours of flight data and 6 flights, including the crash flight. The recovered audio was 2 hours in length and captured the event. Initial analysis of the recorded audio and flight data has now been done. The aft, which is the rear flight data recorder, was substantially damaged and could not be downloaded through conventional means. The damage was expensive, including to the memory card. Now, this comes to the subtext of what happened in the flight. On the 12th of June 2025, Air India's B787 aircraft bearing registration number VTANB arrived at Ahmedabad Airport operating flight AI423 from Delhi. The aircraft touched down at 5:47 UTC, which is 11:17 IST, and parked at Bay 34. The crew of the previous flight AI423 had made a pilot defect report, a PDR entry, for status message STAB POS XDCR in the tech log. The troubleshooting was carried out as per Air India's on-duty maintenance engineer, and the aircraft was released for flight at 6:40 UTC. The aircraft was scheduled to operate flight AI171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick. The flight was to be operated by the flight crew comprising an ATPL holder PIC, a CPL holder co-pilot, along with 10 cabin crew. Both pilots were based at Mumbai and had arrived at Ahmedabad on the previous day. They had an adequate rest period prior to operating the said flight. The co-pilot was a PF, which is pilot flying, and the PIC was a pilot monitoring PM for the flight. The crew of flight AI171 arrived at the airport and underwent pre-flight breath analyzer test at 6:25 UTC and were found fit to operate the flight. The crew is seen arriving at the boarding gate in the CCTV recording at 07:05 UTC. There were 230 passengers on board, 15 passengers were in business class, 215 in economy, including 2 infants. The fuel on board was 55,200 kgs as per the load and trim sheet of the flight. The takeoff weight at 213,401 kgs, which as opposed to the max allowed, which is 218,183 kgs, was within the allowable limits for the given conditions. There were no dangerous goods reported on the aircraft. The calculated V speed, which is the takeoff speed, was 153, which is V1, VR 155, and V2 162 knots. The replay of the flight was carried out after the accident. The aircraft was observed departing from Bay 34. The taxi clearance was received and the aircraft taxied from the bay at 07:56 UTC. The aircraft taxied to runway 23 via taxiway R4, backtracked and lined up. The takeoff clearance was issued at 08:07:33 UTC. The aircraft started rolling at 08:07:37, so 4 seconds later. As per the flight data recorder, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 and achieved 153 knots at 080833 UTC. The VR speed 155 knots was achieved as per the flight data recorder. This happened 2 seconds later. The aircraft air and ground sensor transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff. This happened 4 seconds later. The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots, and that happened 3 seconds later. And immediately thereafter, and this is the core point over here, immediately thereafter, so at 080842 seconds UTC, which is roughly 7 seconds after V1 and VR were crossed, the fuel cutoff switches for both engine 1 and engine 2 transitioned from run to cutoff one after another within a time gap of 1 second. The engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, "Why did he cut off?" The other pilot responded that he did not do so. The CCTV footage obtained from the airport showed the RAM air turbine, the RAT, being deployed during the initial climb immediately after liftoff. No significant bird activity is observed in the vicinity of the flight path. The aircraft started to lose altitude before crossing the airport perimeter wall. As per the flight data recorder, both engine N2 values passed below minimum idle speed, and the RAM air turbine hydraulic pump began supplying hydraulic power about 5 seconds later. So at 42 seconds past 8 minutes past 8 AM UTC, the engine fuel switches cut off. 5 seconds later, the RAM air turbine starts providing the hydraulic power. Now, as per the flight data recorders, the engine 1 fuel cutoff switch transitioned from cutoff to run 3 seconds later. Now, the APU inlet door began opening 2 seconds later, consistent with the APU auto start logic. Thereafter, another 2 seconds later, the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch also transitions from cutoff to run. So the engine 1 switch goes back from cutoff to run. 2 seconds later, the APU auto start logic engages. But at this point of time, the engines are already below minimum idle speed. About 2 seconds later, the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch also transitions from cutoff to run. When the fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run while the aircraft is in flight, each engine's full authority dual engine control, which is called FADEC, automatically manages a relight and thrust recovery sequence of ignition and fuel introduction. So this EGT, which is the engine thrust recovery sequence, was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating that there was a relight. Engine 1's core deceleration had stopped, reversed, and started to recover. Engine 2 was able to relight but could not arrest the core speed deceleration and reintroduce fuel repeatedly to increase core speed acceleration and recovery. But however, 11 seconds later, the flight data recording stops. Now, right before this, 6 seconds before the flight data recording stops, one of the pilots transmitted "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." The air traffic controller inquired about the call sign, but they did not get any response. They observed the aircraft crashing outside the airport boundary and activated the emergency response. Now, where's the investigation? The wreckage site activities, including drone photography, video photography, they've done. They've recovered the engines, they've recovered other components, they've taken fuel samples from the tanks, which is very limited. They've recovered and downloaded the flight data recorder. They've taken the statement of witnesses and the one surviving passenger. They're doing a post-mortem analysis of the crew and passengers to corroborate anything. Additional details are being found. Now, At this stage of the investigation, there is no recommended action to B7878 and or GE NX1B engine operators and manufacturers. This is where the report is inconclusive. They say the investigation is continuing and the investigation team will review and examine additional evidence, records, and information from stakeholders. So this is where we began, ladies and gentlemen. We now have a fair idea what the cause of the crash was. The two fuel supply switches had gone from run to cut-off mode within 1 second of each other. So within a span of 1 second, both the engines and the fuel switches that operated the fuel supply to these engines went into cut-off mode. A few seconds later, they went back into run mode. The engines, which is the left engine and the right engine, tried to go into an auto ignite and restart sequence. In the first engine, the flight data recorder suggests that the engine had stopped slowing down, as in fact was recovering its thrust. The other engine, even though the fuel had been resupplied and the engine had reignited, but it was still slowing down. And this ran out of time because the flight crashes 11 seconds later. So it was the fuel cutoff switches going from run to cutoff switch situation is what led to both the engines simultaneously failing. Now what this doesn't answer is why did the fuel cutoff switches go in the middle of a takeoff from run to cutoff? Was it a mistake? Was there a problem? Now this is where the life and death question sort of lies. Now the big point from this report is that in the end it is inconclusive. So it makes no recommendations, which means that it does not say that other 787 aircrafts or aircrafts operating this GE engine should be grounded for further inspection. It makes no recommendation like that. It just says we have to open this for further investigation. It does not say pilot error, okay, at the get-go. Does it allude pilot error? I can't say because it didn't specifically say so. But given that it makes no recommendation for further safety checks of these engines or aircraft, one would have to suggest that the allusion prima facie that is being made is pilot error. Is that a jumping to conclusion? We don't know. We'll get you more details as they come in. Thanks for listening in.